Hi there. This is going to be a little bit different than how we normally do our videos. I am actually going to be here to provide commentary over this card because I thought it felt important and I had a lot to say about it. So I thought it would just be a little bit easier to talk over it and explain things as they come. First off, I did want to say thanks to Cameron Henning on Instagram for sending me this card to be painted. He sent me this card from his own collection and told me it had just been collecting dust in his closet, so he decided to send it to me to paint it. The card is heavily damaged. It has creases and white edges. There's dirt on the surface, you can kind of tell at the beginning. But yeah, so I cleaned this card up. I removed what stains I could, and then I started painting it. The first thing I do with this card, like I do with all of my cards, is prime it with a gray acrylic. This layer is thinned down heavily with water. It's about a 50-50 mixture. I tend to want to use gray just because I find it covers the text the best and it allows me to layer on other colors more easily. You could prime your cards with white or black or blue or red or anything you think would work best, but I always tend to work with gray. The prime coat also just helps future layers adhere to the card better. Pokemon cards are slightly hydrophobic. They have a waxy top layer that stops paint from adhering to it well. So this prime coat really just sets the groundwork for the rest of the card. Then at this point I come back with a damp toothpick and start removing any paint that may have gone too far into the original artwork. I try to leave as much of the original art as possible. Of course, sometimes I do end up having to cover things just to bring the concept that I want to life, but I try to keep most of it. Here I just start lightly sketching with a pencil. It took me a while to figure out what exactly I wanted this card to look like. I actually sketched a bit off camera in a sketchbook before I got to this point. I do have to say it was quite nerve-wracking to start laying down paint and pencil and pen onto this card. I had kind of sat on this card for a couple of weeks before I felt confident to actually get started on it. So with this card, I was trying to frame the Charizard just to draw your eye to him a little bit more. The original artwork felt really flat to me and I wanted to give a bit more depth to the overall artwork. So I did this by drawing more of the canyon wall that actually overlapped with the Charizard's wing to kind of bring it closer to the foreground and push him back more. I really wanted to give the feel that you had just come upon this beautiful Shining Charizard in the wild. Perhaps you were exploring through a cave and you came out onto this cliff and there he is flying off into the distance. So I really strived to push the background back as far as I can by using a lot of diagonal lines, by using atmospheric colors, lightening them. But yeah, it was hard for me to actually paint on top of his wing at one point. The original artwork didn't have the full wing drawn on, and there's actually a layer of holo foil on top of the art, and I can't physically mimic that. If I had tried to finish his wing by painting it on, it wouldn't have looked right. It would have been opaque and not reflective like the rest of the wing. So I opted to just go ahead and cover it over and use that to make the card have more depth in the end. Like I said before, this card did have a lot of dirt and creases on the surface. I did go back and almost completely repaint the background, matching all of the colors just to cover up any blemishes. There is a trick you can use by layering acrylics on creases to make them look less significant, and I did that to the best of my ability, and I think it ended up working pretty well. I covered up most of the creases. It's hard to tell where they were in the end. As you'll see, I do constantly come back with that damp toothpick and remove any paint that I get on the Charizard itself. I never imagined I would get the opportunity to paint this card. It's always been a pipe dream of mine to happen upon a really cheap Shining Charizard and get to alter it to see what I could do with it, but thankfully Cameron came through and sent me his old one to work on. At this point, I'm just layering the light oranges over top white to get them to pop a little better. Orange is a really tricky color to work with because it tends to be not opaque, so it shows other colors through it really easily. I usually combat this by painting everything white. It's usually 2 or 3 layers of a really thin white acrylic, and then I can come back over top with oranges and yellows to make them match. I did decide just to continue the canyon walls down to the horizon to draw your eye in that direction and where the Charizard is possibly going. There's a trick to paint things with atmospheric depth where you just lighten the colors and add a little bit of blue, and it makes things look like they're receding into the background. But that's a little harder to do with oranges, as when you mix blue with orange, it makes a really muddled brown color and doesn't necessarily work. So I ended up using a light purple and just a lot of white to get that sense of depth. And of course, the parts of the canyon wall that are closer to you are going to be darker. Again, I mixed a darker purple with these oranges to get that visual. At this point, I did decide to add a river just to add more depth to the card and something a little more interesting than just a bunch of canyon walls. I went with this pastel blue. I didn't want to draw too much attention to the bottom of the card, but I wanted there to be something there. So I went with kind of a muted light pastel blue just so it wasn't too distracting. Here I'm starting to just build the geometry of the canyon walls and start detailing the rocks and possible angles. The original background of the card was so light and cool colored that I wanted the inside to be drastically different, so I ended up using a warmer purple to darken the inside canyon walls. There's a really cool trick you can do when painting water with acrylics. Once you get your water line established and you want to show that some of the rocks or landscape is going under the water, you just take that same blue color that you painted your water in with and mix it slightly with the same colors you used for the rocks or landscape. And if you do a 50-50 mixture and paint under the water, it actually makes a really cool effect that looks like the water is see-through. At this point, I decided to start outlining the canyon walls to match the original ones, and I did have to take the card off of the paper there and start rotating it. It's really hard to draw straight lines without moving what you're painting on. I rely a lot on my wrist movements to get straight lines, and it's hard to explain without just knowing what I'm talking about. But essentially, I use the natural movement of my wrist to lay lines straight. So if I can't move my wrist properly, they don't come out very good. So I did unfortunately have to start turning the card a lot. Again, with these outlines, I'm lightening them up with white as I move further into the background to give that sense of depth. I come back in with a white gel pen to draw on water highlights, and that's about it. This card took about 2 hours to complete, not counting the time it took me to sketch out the ideas that I had and plan the entire card out. As with all of my other cards, I do gloss them with a spray sealant to keep the paint intact and to keep it from getting scratched or damaged. It also gives it a nice shiny finish, and it kind of helps pull everything together. And that's it. That's the completed card. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and if you didn't, I would also like to know. Again, it was tough coming up with an artwork that would look good and do this card justice. Unfortunately, I did want to try to work with the original artwork as much as possible, even though it's not that interesting. So if you have any other ideas of what I could have possibly done to this card to make it look better, I'd love to know. But thank you guys as always. Thank you, Cameron, for donating this card. And thanks, Joe, for editing my videos and doing such a great job on everything. So yeah, we'll try to get another video out before the end of the year. This one took me so long to actually get around to doing, so I'm gonna do my best to get another one to you guys before the next year, but if not, I'll see you all in January. Take care.